Right. In order for a project to become a meaningful track, its parts need to have purpose. So I'm basically going to just run you through the sort of the process that I've been using to write tracks recently, and basically clarifying the themes and what you're basically trying to say with your track. This is something that I covered a little bit last time, but I'm going to go in a little bit more depth this time. So yeah. Firstly, I'm going to talk about establishing track themes, and I'm going to refer you to this ramblings of a madman here. Basically, this track that's playing at the moment is a track of mine called Echo, which is coming out later this year. And my approach to this track was basically, I went through the Beatport top 10, and on the left-hand side of this page, I wrote everything themes-wise that I liked about what I was hearing, you know? So yeah, just to run through a couple of them. Atmospheric as opposed to dry, warm as opposed to cold. I'm not sure if you can read that very well. The ESSA is ever so slightly annoying as opposed to too annoying on the other side. So the right-hand side page is basically all of the things, not only in that list of top tracks that I was not a fan of at all, but also in the tracks that I've done in the past. For example, I would say that a lot of the tracks I've done in previous times have been a little bit on the soppy side, or, you know, for example, a little bit too sad or a little bit too cold or whatever. So I put all these themes down on a piece of paper, and at the top left there, Black Swan. I had just seen the movie Black Swan, and there was a scene in that where basically the white swan is watching the black swan move, and the trainer says, look at the way that she moves. You know, she's making a few mistakes, and she's technically not perfect, but the way that she moves is so much more natural. And so that was kind of like the entire idea for this song. So basically, rather than just try and write, like, you know, like I was saying before, all the individual parts, snare, hi-hat, whatever, I went through and I went, okay, I'm going to write dark, or I'm going to write atmospheric, or ever so slightly annoying, as you can hear. This kind of bleepy synth lead here. It's the kind of thing that you hear a lot at, like, sort of festivals. It's kind of like this festival prog kind of thing that's going on. And yeah, a few other sort of like elements that I really wanted to use here is chug, which is kind of just the using like a kick and a tom together to make that kind of like chugging kind of beat. And yeah, basically I wanted to do something that made use of my kind of classical training and musical background without necessarily trying to be so musical in itself, if that makes sense. So yeah, basically I would really suggest trying to have this kind of approach of instead of trying to write, you know, a particular synth line or a cool lead or a cool pluck or something, using those parts as a means to arrive at your destination, which is, you know, writing atmospheric or writing something dark, you know, basically just thinking outside the box a little bit as far as that goes. So yeah, by establishing themes, I basically built a roadmap for the outcome of this track, you know, and I would say it's probably one of my main kind of go-to tracks when I'm playing out nowadays, you know, because of the response that it gets, you know. So yeah, that was just a really sort of eye-opening kind of way of writing for me. So yeah, next thing I want to talk about is the plan of attack, as well as sort of establishing what exactly you're trying to write. It's the method that you're going to go about in order to make it happen. And so the main thing I'm sort of talking about here is order of construction. So for the next sort of little experiment that I had this year, I basically built a track sort of saying the first thing I'm going to do is write the drum track. Second thing I'm going to do is just build out the arrangement, that kind of thing. So I went drum track, then I did incidental effects, smaller melodies, bigger melodies and chords. Basically, I wrote this entire track with no bass line and did the bass very, very last. And I came up with a track that basically, actually the order of attention, the order of focus within the track is actually determined by the order that I wrote it in. I wanted it to sound like something that I could groove along to without there necessarily being a bass line in there before I even thought about having a bass line, if that makes sense. So just going right from the start of that. I just did a whole track of just drum beat, just by itself, you know. Spent like a whole day just doing that. And incidental effects, which is the whooshy sounds you hear in the background, and the structure and things like that. And I worked from there. I built like an ostinato and an arpeggiator from there, basically to just go over the top of it, which you can hear just in the background there. these kind of things. And I basically move through the whole track, trying to get it to sound as interesting as I can, with a few of the elements missing before writing the final thing. So in this track, I would say the bass line is actually the least important element of the entire track. And so what I want to sort of focus on here is how a lot of these different tracks, they need to be driven by one particular force. So in this, I wanted to make it about the drum beat more than anything else. I'm going to play a few examples of some of my other tracks where I've changed the order around a little bit. So my track Ozone, where I made the bass line number 1. So what you're seeing here is just the order of priorities of focus in this track, basically. So this is basically a reversal of the priorities compared to the first track, Paradox, that I was just playing here. So I'm just going to show you quickly a slide. This is actually nabbed straight from my last presentation while I was here. Basically, I want to sort of, at this stage, just introduce the concept of stems, because I'm going to be talking about them a fair bit over the course of the night. Basically, it's not really like the dictionary definition of stems, but basically, I would say that in any kind of typical track that I write, no matter what style it is, it's basically going to come down to these sections. Everything is going to be categorized into these one section. The only thing I would really explain in any more detail than that is maybe atmospheric effects, which I would still put under effects, basically. So you have these kind of stems. I mean, as sonically, structure isn't really one of them, but basically, I would put the kick drum in its own category, the drums in its own category, basses, chords, riffs, pad strings, etc. And so basically, the way that I want to try and write tracks now is to have these kind of prongs sticking out like that, with not too much happening in between them. Basically, I think the best way to write parts for your track is to not have anything kind of sitting in a gray area between these kind of things. And so yeah, I think whereas a lot of tracks that I used to write are quite complex and have quite blurry in that kind of sense, I think it's much better to actually sort of make things as separate, all these stems and categories as separate as you can. And so I think you can have even a project with 100 tracks in it and still have like 6 or 7 or 8 stems, basically. So what I'm sort of going to go through with this project tonight is basically writing in such a way where you're adding elements to a project in such a way that these stems have a kind of gravitational pull, so that basically you're keeping everything streamlined, and thus you're not clouding things too much. You're not stealing the attention too much. So yeah, tonight for this little demo project, I've got. I thought the best way to do it is to use a very, very bare bones, simple project that I can just mold and we can have a play around with as we go along, and that way, just in the sort of natural process of how I normally produce, you can see how things start to take shape. So this project, as it stands, is very, very simple. It's just a kick drum for the time being. I have 2 stems going basically in this at the moment. One would be the kick, and the other one is the atmosphere. So there's our lovely kick drum. It's a little on the snappy and trebly side, but I don't think that's really that much of an issue for the time being. And then I've got this atmosphere track, which I'll just run you through quickly because it's got a few effects on it already. So there's this pad, which is from some kind of Korg thing, I believe. And so I'll just play you this without the effects. Everything I'm doing tonight is going to be with basically pretty simple effects and stuff like that, because I'm not sure what kind of setups people are using. So yeah, so it'll be a lot of kind of like Ableton effects. I'm going to use just a handful of synths, to make life easier and to make things a little bit more simple. So yeah, with that, it's a little bit drier sounding. So this is what I would call the FX track, the FX stem, basically just sitting there by itself. And for the moment, because there's not very much going on in the project, it's very clear and it's defined. And removing it from the project makes a huge difference, basically. So that's what I'm trying to get at, is basically we want these stems to be really, really defined and have their own kind of character. So yeah, I've got a few little extra elements thrown in here to save time. For example, a little hat to go with the kick. And again. Little 16th hat shaker. A clap that I'm probably not going to use. And this is a different clap, which I probably am going to use. So that's going to be sort of the lump of putty that we start with, and we'll have a play with that as we go along. But I'll come back to that in a minute. So that basically is the first step of clarify, just getting a few sort of steps, to try and get an idea of what you're trying to write, because I think it helps a lot, As I was saying before, having those kind of guidelines of the kind of like vibes that I was trying to write with my music made things come down a lot easier.